So Urban Farmer Restaurant, Urban Farmer Steakhouse is here in Portland for you are not from town. We actually have another one in Cleveland, Ohio, and a third coming up in Philadelphia. So I want to talk about kind of what the landscape of sourcing looks like for a restaurateur, how we develop those partnerships in those different communities, how do we go in, how we establish them, how they grow, and then kind of the future of food as well, which is one of the main points of this conference, right? I think for starters, sorry, I move around a lot. This whole standing in one place thing doesn't work for me. I'm a chef. Next slide, please. Oh, we jumped. All right. So, commitment. That's what this slide means to me. All right. So you have Kevin Costner here, who's a little bit dark. The sun is setting on him, so you can't really see his face. But it's setting on the current day, and the new day will rise, and he will cut down his cornfield, and he will commit to the next phase in his life, right? And it's kind of serendipitous that he's cutting down his food system to commit to moving forward. So within the food systems of the United States, in order to move anything forward, you have to commit as an owner. They have to commit financially, because a lot of the food systems, they're not cheaper. When you want to be on the bleeding edge, like Peter said, you have to commit your resources, and oftentimes things aren't cheaper. You know, the eggs aren't cheaper, the organic, non-GMO. To start off with, the food systems are small, and we need to commit that and make sure that we're going to allow it to grow. The chefs commit their vision of the food, their skill, their craft. Farmers commit to the purity of the land that they sow, or maybe the ranchers or the aquaculturists all commit to engaging in providing that purity and providing that conversation. And then the community needs to commit to the consumption, right? So a lot of you here have products that you want your people to consume. The community needs to commit to what they want in a food system. They have to commit to spending their money to do it. So in order to get all this going, we have to engage. We've heard that word a couple times today. And in that, we have to be listening. So in this system right here, there's no possible way to hear what somebody else is saying on the other end of the line unless you have intent. You're listening with intent, and you're speaking slowly, and you're speaking clearly. So it's said that you can have 1.6 conversations is what you can pay attention to. And in this case, I don't think that you can really pay attention to one in some ways. You have to choose what you're going to communicate in a sense that you have to be open with your heart. You have to say, I'm a restaurateur, I need the following item. I need this much of it. I want it to be this quality. I want it to be this pedigree. And from on our systems, the ranchers have to commit to that conversation as well as being able to say, I'm willing to do that. I heard earlier today they were referencing, if you're going to be out of something, you have to communicate. That's very important, but communicating on the front end of how much you have is also important, because the farming community 10 years ago, CSAs were the new thing, right? And now what we're trying to do is we're almost trying to create a CSA-style food culture that restaurants buy into, right? So you're sourcing your spinach, but I go through 60 pounds of spinach every 3 days at my steakhouse, and it takes a lot to sustain that. So I might need to pull it from 3 or 4 different farms. And so if we're all communicating in the food system, then I never have an outage, but yet I can still engage in the local food system. I don't have to go to that commodity market that I don't want to. So we listen, we communicate what we want, and we all have a voice in the food systems. We also communicate with our vote, right? We might vote non-GMO, we might not. We might vote for a politician that commits to open space. We share those experiences, and the pace of innovation, the pace of sharing is going faster and faster every day, right? At this pace, not very quick, right? It takes a while to get our point across. At this pace, it's lightning fast. It's almost instantaneous. Peter was talking about the pace at which things get picked up, and that cycle that everything's going through is faster and faster. A little bit of the history. Ooh, I have a little laser. This is nice. This is my interaction with the food systems 10 years ago. So at the time, my restaurateur committed financially. I was a young chef, and he gave me $1,000 and an Econoline van to go to the farmer's market and engage in the food community. So back 10 years ago, that was some pretty big buying power. And so we have Jesse, we have Mr. Kashiswazi, some market produce. These are all the same individuals that you'll see there in San Rafael, California today. They're still involved in that food system. And I'm not going to purport that I was a small part of their success. Their success was their commitment. However, I will tell one story about another part of ownership and financial commitment is David Little right here. He had a potato farm. This is back in 2001. And he came to us and he needed a new tractor, and he needed $4,000. And we gave him $4,000 cash so he could buy a new tractor. And he gave us in return in the next 4 months $4,000 worth of potatoes. And when I saw that commitment in in the ownership and that financial commitment, that commitment to the community, that really set a tone with me. I decided right then and there, I stayed with that company for a long time, but I decided that companies that I would work for in the future will have to have that commitment, or something like it that I could see, or some involvement that would allow that for me. I have that today, working for Peter. It's brilliant. And so we fast forward, though, 10 years later. These are the people currently that I deal with, and it's not a lot different. The stories are different. But the relationships are the same. There's kind of a rising awareness within the food community. There's definitely a different culture of supply and demand, though. I'll tell a story about Portland. I came here to Portland 6 years ago. And versus 10 years ago, you show up with $1,000 cash and you want to buy everybody's strawberries. And you say, I want to buy all these strawberries. And I want them for $10 off a case. Well, they're going to go home early, and they're going to sell all their strawberries, and they're going to make a serious piece of money, and they're going to go. So I get the best of the best. I have buying power, I have cash, and I get to buy all the strawberries. I get to Portland thinking I'm going to have the same economic model, and I go up there and I was like, I'd like to buy all your strawberries. Great, no problem. But they're not giving me a discount because they know they will get top dollar for their product by the end of the day, and they will make X hundred more dollars. And so the food economy changed on me. It didn't change fast. It changed over 10 years, but maybe I wasn't paying attention the right way. I wasn't listening with intent to what the community was versus what I wanted it to be. And so at that time, I didn't change on a dime. I was frustrated by it, right? I was like, oh, Portland doesn't get it. But then I changed, and once I changed, I gained better, deeper relationships. I listened more. I understood what the farmers needed, and as I understood that, I gained other relationships. I gave a main one. Scott Laney is up here on the left side of the screen. One day I was in the restaurant, and our general manager came to me and he said, I got a guy in the restaurant and he wants to give you a whole cow. Well, one of the interesting things we do at Urban Farmer is whole cow butchering, whole animal butchering. We'll talk about that in a second. But I was like, well, introduce me to this guy. So we talked. He brought his cow in. He had a new breed, a cross between a Pinzgauer and a Red Angus. I didn't know what that was at the time, but I was willing to listen and learn. And I learned a lot about genetics, and I can't give any kind of a speech like the doctor did about genetics. But I learned enough to be able to engage in the conversation and listen and understand what it was they needed. And I also learned a little bit more patience. And so he gave me this cow. It was great. It wasn't quite as marbled as well as I wanted it to. It didn't have enough fat. The ribeyes were small. So I gave him this feedback. And Scott listened to me. And he said, well, let me go work on that. And I just thought it was like, oh, I got a free cow. He's going to work on it. Great. Turns out 6 months later, he came back. He said, I fixed it. What do you think of this one? And when I bought the cow from him, and it was way better. It was marbled better. He had changed the feed. He had let it grow larger, but it wasn't instantaneous. Fast forward 2.5 years later, we now have a specific breed that he's grown for us within his genetics. He finishes it on 120 days for non-GMO Oregon-raised corn, and brings us one cow every single month, and we process it in-house. And it produces a lot of enjoyment for our guests, and it produces a lot of other things we'll talk about in a second. Other relationships that have helped spawn the growth of Sage Restaurant Group and the Urban Farmer brand specifically. This is Liz from the Portland Creamery, and she makes goat cheese locally. And I had a conversation with her one day. I was like, yeah, we're going to be opening this place in Ohio, and it's really exciting. And she's like, oh, my family's from Ohio. And I said, okay, great. And that's as far as I took it. And then I said, hey, who do you know in Ohio? I'm going out there next month, and I'm going to check out some different farmers and stuff like that. She's like, well, go visit my mom. I'm like, well, okay, I'll visit your mom. She'll be fun. Well, I learned then that she learned how to make goat cheese from her mom, who runs Mackenzie River Creamery in Ohio. And so right there, it was a complete loop. It was instant on. I knew exactly where I was going to get my goat cheese. I knew exactly how it was going to be made, and I got to visit her farm. And that was one of the ways that we were able to go into the community with a lot more success, because I had learned 6 years before to listen. And when we went to Cleveland, we were able to engage with the farmers, and some of them were great, and some of them wanted to be a part of our business, and some of them communicated, that's too much for me. You're too big. We can't support you. And then we said, well, how about we just try a little bit, and made it okay for the farmers and the ranchers to just supply a little bit and engage in the conversation. And we said, we will listen. We will understand. We know you're not going to be our only supplier for this one thing. And that was empowering to them as well. So it's that cycle that we're always trying to kind of continue on with. In the middle here, the spinach example I gave earlier, we grew one of the local farmers in Cleveland's business so much that they put a $12,000 hoop house in to grow spinach year-round for us. And because of that commitment, because we had been buying consistently for 4 months, they felt empowered, and they felt confident that they could invest that money, and we would continue that. And it was a gentleman's agreement. We haven't signed any contracts and nothing like that. I think that's the way of the world, is just believing in the best, and we continue to do that as well. As a chef, I have a little bit of ADD. My ADD is called do-it-yourself. I always want to make everything myself, learn how it's made. I want to try it myself. And over the last 2 or 3 years, I've realized that that's really exciting. However, it's not a guaranteed that I'm going to do it well. So I've learned a lot, but what I've used it as is there's a few things that I do well, but there's also a few things that I do just so I know how to do them, right? My dad was a high school art teacher. He taught me how to throw pottery on a wheel. He taught me how to do jewelry. He taught me how to work with my hands and in my mind. And so that's kind of where I get it from. That's why I want to tinker. But at the same time, I've learned that as I've started to tinker with different projects, that I also want to learn from the professionals. We need our specialists back in all of our communities. That's one of the main things that really, really drives me to be here in Portland, stay here in Portland for as long as I can, my family, is that they have so many specialists. And I think Greg's going to speak to a few of those that he involves, that are involved in his world in a little bit. But it might be a chocolatier. It might be someone who makes their own salt. It might be somebody who harvests from the sea, which he's going to mention. It might be the ranchers, the farmers. It might be a certain potter that makes a beautiful plateware that I can serve my food on. It's all kinds of great things in this community. It's organic food. It's paleo. It's commitment to aquaculture, things like that. And so I'm committed to basically understanding, and then what I can continue to do and support myself, I will, but then also committing to consuming from those specialists within my business. This is one of the ways that I am a specialist, and that is the butchering program at Urban Farmer. That animal that we get one a month, and we have several other opportunities to buy specialty animals every month. These are kind of some of the different items that it produces, whether it be hamburgers or bone broths or different opportunities as well. We support 8 full-time butchers. That includes myself. It includes 2 full-time hourly employees plus all my managers, all involving in that skill. They have that learning opportunity, and they get to also engage with those farmers and ranchers and grow their own careers. One of the fun things, 2 fun things to note, when you buy these animals, you buy them hot weight, which means it's hanging there and you pay the weight that it's hanging there at. And so you pay, let's just say, rough math, you pay $4 a pound. Well, as you're doing butchering these animals, you have a lot of fat. And you're holding in your hands 60 pounds of fat. That's really not usable because you can't grind it into a burger. It makes it way too fatty. So I'm looking at these 60 pounds of fat, $240 in my hands, and you throw a few sets of $240 in the garbage, and you stop doing that really fast. And so I jumped on my wonderful little machine here, told me what to do with it. And I started rendering it down into tallow, We burn our own tallow candles in the restaurant on every single table that tells that story, and it keeps all of those fuel cells out of the landfill, and so it moves right into that power of story that is Urban Farmer. The other thing that I do, which is definitely not something that I'm a pro at, but I am a do-it-yourselfer, and that is we make soap out of the tallow. So I mix it with the sodium. This is the fat on the left. We render it down in the middle, and then I've got my little Breaking Bad kit there. To little sodium hydroxide, some bergamot oil, and cedar, and the rest is a secret formula that I change every time I make it. It takes about 6 weeks to cure. It's a fun process. And then we have our own branding iron that we brand our little soap in. So you'll have to look for that next time you visit me. What's the future of food? I don't know what it is. I know that I can kind of I've already spoken to 10 years ago what it was for me, where it is now, my commitment to listening, to communicating, to consuming. Maybe this is the future. On the left, a good friend of mine named Jeff Brown, who's standing in the back of the room, bought me my first aquaponics kit. Thank you, Jeff. And so we're going to get that running. I don't know how to do it. I am not going to support the consumption of my restaurant on any kind of aquaponics system until one like this on the right is built. But I'm going to learn to understand it and grow and be able to speak to it, and maybe it becomes part of the ethos. Maybe it becomes part of special dinners and things you can create kind of a value add for your customers, and it speaks to the commitment that you have that maybe is just below the surface. I don't think that at our restaurants we force feed how special some of the things we do are to people, but we have all the knowledge that when people want to know, it's there for them. They can know where their food came from, why it's meaningful. And then again, just kind of going back to my 10 years ago is where aquaponics started with me. On the top right is Tsar Nikolai Caviar in Northern California. And you go there, these are tanks where all the sturgeon are living. And I'm there, and they're pumping all this water into this huge pond. And it's a gravity-fed pond, so the water goes through these canals. And as the water goes by, the feces falls out of the water, and it feeds the algae on the bottom. The algae on the bottom oxygenate the water. And then that water is pumped out into the tank. So it's a complete closed-loop system for oxygenating the water for the fish. Excuse me. The water also then becomes very nutrient-dense. And I'm there, and they point over there, like, see that styrofoam floating in the water, and see it's got plants on it? I'm like, yeah. Well, that's our aquaponics system. Those are little plants. We're growing lettuces. And this literally is big as this table. And it's just kind of sitting there in this huge pond. I'm like, oh, that's really cool. Can I get some? Well, not yet. All right. Fast forward 10 years. You go on their website now, and their whole cover page is their entire aquaponics system, which they support off of their fish. Of course, they're a caviar company. That's what they raise the fish to do. But it's kind of an interesting byproduct. It's kind of a closed loop. Eventually, I'm not going to make any predictions, but where I feel food might be going is that you have all these large food systems that are all supported by the government, and I'm not going to get into the political aspect of how many hectares will produce how much food for any cow or person or population. However, I think that we will all play a key role in growing our own food again. We'll go back to those days of the specialists. We'll be empowered with the knowledge to do it. And maybe we'll have aquaponic systems in our homes, producing a small amount for our family or our neighbors. And maybe we'll get back into that kind of personal equity culture of, I can do this for that. So there are many, many cogs in our system. You know, I want to know what all of them do. This is my do-it-yourself. What does this cog do? How many teeth does it have? How fast does it spin? Where is it moving? Where is it going? Who made it? And that's really fun, but until it lines up, until we have some kind of structure and order, until we're communicating, this is my cog, here's how fast it's going around, how does it fit with yours, doesn't make any sense. Sometimes they will bounce off of them, and this is like that shift in that old Ford 150 from 1967, trying to get it in gear sometimes. But here it is, it's all meshing up. When these kinds of things happen, that's when the future of food happens for me. So if we listen, we commit to consuming, and we share those experiences, I think that we'll all be able to take part in what the future of food is. So thank you. Greg Gourdet is going to share also some great examples of his connections and how we do that as a food culture.